Fox Alert, we're going to get out of that commercial break because we have word that the Supreme Court has issued a ruling on the extent of presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for conduct alleged to involve official acts during the tenure of President Trump. This is the big one we've been waiting for. It's consequential. It's really interesting that the Supreme Court in 248 years of our history has never actually ruled on this. So it is big and sweeping. And I have our political panel looking over this right now. Andy McCarthy, Chief Justice John Roberts has the writing on this. He's got the pen. Is that significant?
It's very significant. This is the most important case of the term in terms of the long-term interests of the executive branch, in terms of the short-term interests of Donald Trump. And it looks like, at least within the bounds of clear executive authority, what Chief Justice Roberts is saying is that the president clearly has immunity from prosecution. So the question is going to be, again, I think Trey underscored this before, is what is an official act? There's going to be a lot of litigation about that and what's close to the core.
Hello guys, welcome back to another John podcast. So this is happening right now. A federal appeals court has dismantled Trump's key legal defenses, ruling that self-pardons are invalid, his immunity claims are extremely narrow, and there is no immunity for impeachable crimes, meaning prosecutions can proceed after his presidency ends. The decision points toward the real possibility that Trump could face federal prison, as every escape hatch he relied on has been systematically shut down. Now here's where this gets genuinely terrifying for Trump. His entire legal strategy has been built on two escape hatches. The first escape hatch was self-pardon. Trump has been suggesting he might just pardon himself for all federal crimes, issue himself a blanket pardon, and make the federal cases go away.
Of clear executive constitutional authority versus the outer ambit of it.
Do we have Shannon? Is she going through the paperwork? Shannon, you there?
Yes, I am here. If you can hear me, let me read you a little bit of what we have from the court. It does find this: under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority. He is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts. There is no immunity for unofficial acts. That's the first blush we've got on this. It looks like a 6-3 split. We've got the dissent by Justice Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson join that. There is a kind of split decision on some of these. Somebody joins in one part, not in another part, but that's the overall holding of the court. So what it means now, we'll have to dig into this and see if they tell us now, how do you decide an official act versus an unofficial act?
If that didn't work, his backup plan was to argue that as a former president, he has immunity that prevents prosecution, that presidential immunity shields him from criminal charges even after he leaves office. Those were Trump's two main defenses, self-pardon and immunity, and this appeals court ruling just destroyed both of them. Let me explain why this is absolutely catastrophic for Trump. The self-pardon has been Trump's nuclear option, his last resort if everything else failed. The idea that as president he has the constitutional power to grant pardons, and that power includes pardoning himself. If that worked, the federal criminal charges would simply disappear. He'd be pardoned, couldn't be prosecuted, problem solved. That's been a potential escape hatch that legal experts have debated extensively.
Because that's going to be critical, having now said the president does have absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority. We'll dig in, see how they define those official acts, and look for a little bit more from you from the opinion. But at first blush, this looks like it is going to be a win for the argument for presidential immunity when it comes to allegations of criminal activity.
What's interesting is that, I'm sure if you're the Biden White House, you're paying close attention to this as well, because in the situation that we find ourselves in the utilization of the justices in politics. Let me go to you, Jonathan Turley, for a reaction to this decision so far.
Well, this is along the lines of what many of us anticipated, that the court did not go with absolute immunity on everything, but did say that there's absolute immunity when it comes to core constitutional powers. We're still going through the opinion to see if there's any assistance on where that line is to be drawn. This case is going to have to go back to the district court, which is going to have to try to sort of thread this needle to determine what in the case would not fall under these protections. But this is obviously a win for President Trump in the sense that
some argued the Constitution allows self-pardons. Others argued it doesn't. It's been this open question, but this D.C. Circuit ruling closes that question definitively. The court said Trump's self-pardon attempt is completely invalid, has no legal effect whatsoever. The reasoning is straightforward. Pardons are grants of mercy from one person to another. You can't grant mercy to yourself. That defeats the whole purpose of the pardon power. The framers of the Constitution intended pardons to be acts where the president shows mercy to someone else, not where the president shields himself from accountability. A self-pardon violates the basic logic of the pardon power.
The special counsel was arguing, as with the lower court, that there was very little immunity here to be concerned with. The counsel for the government was assuring the court that they really didn't have much to be concerned with here in terms of any changes in the status of the case. That's clearly not what won the day. The court here is saying that we do need lines here drawn to protect presidents so they have some breathing room. And you have to sort of wonder how the context affected the justices. I mean, if they want to look at the implications of leaving presidents without protection, they just need to look around the country. Even though Manhattan was not a federal case, it was a political prosecution in the view of many of us that was rather raw and open. And so this is a context that must have concentrated the minds of these justices as they did what Justice Gorsuch said and tried to write for the ages, to have something not for this case, but for future cases and future presidents.
So the court closed the door on that strategy. Trump can't just wish away his federal criminal problems with a piece of paper granting himself immunity from prosecution. The immunity ruling is equally devastating. Trump has been arguing that as president, he has broad immunity from criminal prosecution, that official acts are protected, that even after he leaves office, he can't be prosecuted for things he did while president because of presidential immunity. The Supreme Court gave Trump some support on this, saying presidents have immunity for official acts. But this D.C. Circuit ruling clarifies and narrows that immunity significantly. The court said Trump's immunity claims are extremely narrow, much narrower than Trump has been arguing. The immunity covers a very small range of core official acts, but most of what Trump is charged with falls outside that narrow immunity. Most of his conduct was unofficial, was campaign-related, was personal, was about trying to stay in power rather than exercising legitimate presidential authority. So the immunity doesn't protect most of what Trump did, doesn't shield him from most of the charges he faces. And here's the really important part. The court said there is no immunity for impeachable crimes. That's explicit. If you committed crimes that are impeachable offenses, crimes that Congress could impeach and remove you for, then you don't get immunity protection. And that's huge because most of what Trump is charged with are impeachable offenses. Trying to overturn an election, that's impeachable. Obstructing Congress, that's impeachable. Taking classified documents and refusing to return them, that's impeachable. So the court is saying for the very crimes that are most serious, for the crimes that threaten our democracy, there's no immunity. You can be prosecuted for those. And that strips away most of Trump's immunity defense because the serious charges, the ones that carry heavy prison time, those are impeachable offenses, and therefore those are prosecutable despite any immunity claims. The court also made it clear that prosecutions can proceed after the presidency ends. There's been debate about whether presidents can be prosecuted at all after leaving office for things they did while president. And the court made it clear, yes, they can be. Once you're no longer president, once you're a private citizen again, the prosecutions move forward, the cases proceed to trial, the evidence gets presented, and you face the same criminal justice system as anyone else. You don't get permanent immunity just because you used to be president. Your immunity ends when your term ends. And after that, you're subject to prosecution like any any other defendant. Now, let me talk about what this means in practical terms because the implications are genuinely staggering. Trump faces charges in multiple cases. The New York case where he was convicted, that's 34 counts with potential sentences up to 4 years each. The federal election obstruction case, 4 counts with potential sentences totaling 50 years at maximum. The classified documents case, 40 counts with some charges carrying 10 to 20-year maximums. The Georgia case with RICO and other charges with serious prison exposure. There are other potential cases too: tax investigations, fraud allegations, bank fraud, insurance fraud. All of it carries potential prison time. When you add it all up, the combined maximum exposure is well over 100 years. If you took every charge and gave it the maximum sentence and ran them consecutively, Trump would be sentenced to more than a century in prison. Now, obviously, that's not realistic. Judges don't impose maximum sentences on everything. Sentences run concurrently, not consecutively. First-time offenders get some leniency. All of that is true. But even accounting for all of that, Trump is looking at serious prison time. If he gets convicted on the major charges, let's say he gets convicted in the classified documents case on just a few of the serious counts. Even if the judge is lenient, that's probably 10 to 15 years. Let's say he gets convicted in the election obstruction case on the major counts. That's probably another 5 to 10 years. Even with leniency, you stack those up, even running concurrently, and Trump is looking at a sentence of 10 to 15 years, and Trump is 78 years old. So a 10 to 15 year sentence is effectively life. He's not getting out. He dies in federal prison. That's the math. That's the reality this ruling creates. The court made it clear Trump has no defenses left. The self-pardon is invalid. The immunity is too narrow to protect most charges. There's no immunity for impeachable crimes. Prosecutions proceed after the presidency. Every escape route is closed. Every legal defense has been stripped away. And Trump is left facing the reality that when his presidency ends, he's going to trial. And if he's convicted, which seems likely given the strength of the evidence in at least some of these cases, he's going to prison for what amounts to the rest of his life. Let me take you deeper into what this ruling actually means for Trump's future. The self-pardon ruling is absolutely critical because if self-pardons worked, Trump could just make all his federal problems go away with the stroke of a pen. He could issue himself a blanket pardon covering all federal crimes, and then the federal cases would be dismissed. You can't prosecute someone who's been pardoned. Game over. Trump wins. That's why the self-pardon has been Trump's nuclear option, his last resort if everything else fails. But this court just took that option away, said self-pardons are invalid, have no legal effect. And that means Trump can't wish his problems away, can't grant himself immunity through a pardon, has to actually face the charges and defend himself in court. And that's devastating because Trump's whole strategy has been built around avoiding trial, delay, fight on procedure, and if all else fails, pardon himself. But now that last option is gone, and Trump has to actually defend against the charges on the merits, has to let juries decide, has to risk conviction, and conviction means prison. Here's why this matters so much. The evidence in these cases is strong, really strong, particularly in the classified documents case. FBI agents found classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Trump's own staff testified about how he handled them. There are recordings where Trump allegedly talks about classified information. That's a really solid case. Hard to beat at trial. So if Trump has to actually defend that case on the merits, if he can't just pardon himself out of it, he's probably going to lose, probably going to get convicted. And conviction on the classified documents charges means serious prison time. We're talking 10 to 20 years on some counts for a 78-year-old man. That's life. The immunity ruling is equally important because Trump has been arguing that even if he can't pardon himself, he's got immunity. Presidents are immune from prosecution for official acts. So even the serious charges might be protected by immunity. That's been Trump's second line of defense. But this court said no, said Trump's immunity claims are extremely narrow, said most of what he's charged with falls outside immunity protection, said there's no immunity for impeachable crimes, and that strips away Trump's immunity defense for the most serious charges. The classified documents, that's not an official act. That's Trump acting as a private citizen after his presidency ended. No immunity. The election obstruction, a lot of that involves private actors and campaign activity, not official acts, no immunity. And even if some of it arguably involves official acts, the court said there's no immunity for impeachable crimes. And trying to overturn an election is definitely impeachable, so no immunity. What this means is Trump can't hide behind presidential immunity to avoid prosecution. When his term ends and prosecutors refile charges, Trump will have to actually defend on the merits. Will have to argue he didn't commit the crimes, can't just say, "I was president, so you can't touch me." And defending on the merits is much harder because the evidence exists. The documents were found. The witnesses have testified. The recordings are on tape. So Trump probably loses. Probably gets convicted. And conviction with no immunity defense means full sentences, means potentially decades in federal prison, means dying in custody. That's what the narrow immunity ruling creates. It forces Trump to fight cases he probably can't win, with evidence he probably can't overcome. And losing means life in prison. The court saying prosecutions can proceed after the presidency is hugely significant because there's been this question about whether the legal system would actually follow through, whether prosecutors would have the will to indict and try a former president, whether courts would allow it, whether there would be political pressure to let Trump go and move on. But this ruling answers those questions. The court said explicitly, yes, prosecutions proceed after the presidency. That's allowed. That's appropriate. That's how the system should work. So now prosecutors have judicial blessing to move forward. They know courts will allow the cases to proceed. No, they don't have to worry about some blanket prohibition on prosecuting former presidents. And that makes it much more likely these cases actually go to trial because prosecutors have the green light from the appeals court, have been told explicitly that these prosecutions can and should proceed once Trump leaves office. That changes the political calculus too. Before this ruling, there was ambiguity. Maybe we'll prosecute, maybe we won't. Depends on political conditions, depends on public opinion. Lots of uncertainty. But now, the court has made it clear. These cases should proceed. There's no legal barrier, no constitutional problem. Just prosecute him like you would anyone else once he's no longer president. And that makes it much harder for prosecutors to back down or not pursue the cases because they've been told explicitly by a federal appeals court that prosecution is appropriate. So they're almost obligated to move forward, to take these cases to trial, to seek convictions. And convictions mean prison. So by saying prosecutions can proceed, the court is effectively ensuring they will proceed, is making it almost inevitable that Trump faces trial once his presidency ends. And facing trial means facing prison. Trump's age makes this a de facto life sentence, even with moderate sentences, because Trump is 78. If his presidency ends in 4 years, he'll be 82. And if he then goes to trial and gets convicted and sentenced to even 10 years, he's looking at getting out at 92. That's not realistic. Most people don't live that long, and Trump's not exactly in great health. So a 10-year sentence at age 82 is effectively life. He dies in prison, doesn't get out, doesn't have any years of freedom left. It's over. And when you look at the charges Trump faces, 10 years is a conservative estimate. The classified documents charges alone could result in 15 or 20-year sentences. The obstruction charges could add more. Stack a couple serious convictions together and you're easily at 15 to 20 years, even if the judge is being lenient. And 15 to 20 years for an 82-year-old is absolutely life. There's no getting out, no chance of freedom, just dying in federal custody. That's the reality Trump faces. And that's why life in prison isn't hyperbole, it's just math. Trump's age plus the length of likely sentences if convicted equals dying in prison. The court has removed all his defenses. He can't self-pardon. He can't claim immunity for most charges. Prosecutions will proceed, so he goes to trial. And if he's convicted on the serious charges, which seems likely given the evidence, he gets sentences that combined are longer than his remaining life expectancy. Therefore, he dies in prison. That's the logical conclusion. That's what this ruling makes inevitable, not certain. Juries could acquit. Judges could be incredibly lenient. Trump could die before trials happen, but probable. More likely than not, the most realistic outcome given what we know about the charges and evidence and Trump's age. Life in prison is now the default expectation, the most likely result. That's what this ruling creates. This explains Trump's political behavior too. Why he's so desperate to stay in power. Why he pushes every boundary. Why he defies every norm. Because Trump knows this ruling exists. Knows his defenses are gone. Knows prison is waiting when his presidency ends. So his only strategy is to never let the presidency end, to find ways to extend his term, to change the rules, to prevent the transfer of power, whatever it takes to avoid becoming a private citizen again. Because becoming a private citizen means facing these charges, means going to trial, means probably getting convicted, means definitely going to prison. So Trump will do anything to avoid that outcome. Will push democracy to the breaking point if necessary, will create constitutional crises, will defy courts and Congress, all because the alternative is dying in federal prison. That's the stakes for Trump personally, and it affects everything he does, every decision, every action, all driven by this desperate need to avoid the moment when his presidency ends and the legal system comes for him. Now let me bring all of this together and explain why this ruling is so consequential for Trump's future. The D.C. Circuit has issued a ruling that destroys Trump's main legal defenses. Self-pardon doesn't work. Immunity is too narrow to protect most charges. There's no immunity for impeachable crimes. Prosecutions will proceed after the presidency. Trump has no escape routes left. And when his presidency eventually ends, he faces trial on multiple serious felony charges. Charges that carry decade-plus sentences. Charges where the evidence is strong and convictions are likely. And convictions at Trump's age mean life in prison, mean dying in federal custody. That's not speculation. That's not partisan wishful thinking. That's just the logical outcome of the legal situation this ruling creates. Trump faces serious charges. He has no defenses. Trials will happen, convictions are probable, and sentences will be long enough that Trump dies in prison given his age. That's the conveyor belt. That's the path this ruling creates. From presidency to prison with no stops, no exits, just the inevitability of Trump spending his final years behind bars. And there's nothing he can do about it except try to stay president forever, which he can't. So life in prison isn't just possible. Given this ruling and the charges and the evidence and Trump's age, it's the most likely outcome. It's what happens if the system works the way the court says it should. Let me break down exactly what Trump is facing in each case. The New York case where he was already convicted. That's 34 counts of felony falsifying business records. The sentencing in that case alone could result in significant prison time. 4 years on each count, though they'll run concurrently, but even a concurrent sentence could be substantial. The federal election obstruction case. That's the case where Trump is accused of trying to overturn the 2020 election. That has 4 counts with potential sentences totaling 50 years at maximum. The classified documents case. That's 40 counts with some charges carrying 10 to 20-year maximums. That's the case where the evidence is strongest. The FBI found classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Trump's own staff testified. There are recordings. That's a case Trump is very likely to lose if it goes to trial. And the Georgia case. That's the RICO case with other charges. That has serious prison exposure too. When you add it all up, the combined maximum exposure is well over 100 years. And while it's unrealistic to think Trump would get the maximum on everything, even a fraction of that is devastating. A conviction in the classified documents case alone could result in 10 to 20 years. A conviction in the election obstruction case could result in another 5 to 10 years. Stack those together and you're at 15 to 30 years. For a man who is already 78, that's life, that's dying in prison. The court's reasoning on the self-pardon issue is particularly important because it closes what would have been Trump's easiest escape route. The court said pardons are grants of mercy from one person to another. You can't grant mercy to yourself. That defeats the whole purpose of the pardon power. The framers intended pardons to be acts where the president shows mercy to someone else, not where the president shields himself from accountability. So a self-pardon violates the basic logic of the pardon power. That's a definitive ruling that closes the door on Trump's self-pardon strategy. And it means Trump can't just wish away his federal criminal problems with a piece of paper granting himself immunity from prosecution. The immunity ruling is equally important because it strips away Trump's second line of defense. The court said Trump's immunity claims are extremely narrow. Most of what he's charged with falls outside immunity protection. There's no immunity for impeachable crimes. That means Trump can't hide behind presidential immunity to avoid prosecution. When his term ends and prosecutors refile charges, Trump will have have to actually defend on the merits. We'll have to argue he didn't commit the crimes. Can't just say, I was president so you can't touch me. And defending on the merits is much harder because the evidence exists. The documents were found. The witnesses have testified. The recordings are on tape. The prosecutions can proceed. Ruling is significant because it ensures that Trump can't use his presidency as a shield forever. Once he's no longer president, the cases move forward. The trials happen. The convictions come. And the sentences are imposed. There's no permanent immunity. There's no blanket protection. There's just the same justice system that applies to everyone else. Trump's age makes this a de facto life sentence. He's 78. If his presidency ends in 4 years, he'll be 82. A 10-year sentence at that age is effectively life. A 15-year sentence is absolutely life. And the charges Trump faces could easily result in 15 to 20 years, even with leniency. That means Trump dies in federal prison. That's the reality this ruling creates. And it's why Trump is so desperate to avoid the end of his presidency, why he's pushing every boundary, why he's defying every norm, because the alternative is dying in federal custody. What makes this ruling so devastating for Trump is that it takes away every argument he's been making, every defense he's been relying on, every escape route he thought he had. The self-pardon doesn't work. The immunity doesn't protect most charges. There's no immunity for impeachable crimes. Prosecutions proceed after the presidency. All of Trump's legal defenses are gone. All of his escape routes are closed, and he's left facing the very real possibility of spending the rest of his life in federal prison. Now, obviously, there are still uncertainties. The cases could be delayed. There could be appeals. Juries could acquit. Judges could be lenient. Trump could die before trials happen. All of that is possible. But the most likely outcome, the default expectation given this ruling and the charges and the evidence in Trump's age, is that Trump ends up in federal prison for what amounts to the rest of his life. That's not hyperbole. That's just the logical conclusion of the legal situation this ruling creates. The court basically created a conveyor belt, a legal conveyor belt that takes Trump from the presidency straight to prison. While he's president, he's protected by the office. But the moment his term ends, the conveyor belt activates, the cases proceed, the trials happen, the convictions come, and Trump ends up in federal prison serving what is effectively a life sentence given his age and the length of potential sentences. That's the system the court just created. That's the reality Trump is now facing. And there's nothing he can do about it. He can't self-pardon his way out. He can't claim immunity. He can't delay forever. Eventually, his presidency ends. Eventually, he has to face these charges. And when he does, prison is waiting. That's why people are saying life in prison is now inevitable. Because Trump has no legal defenses left. No way to stop the prosecutions. No way to avoid trials. And if juries convict on the serious charges, Trump goes to prison for what amounts to the rest of his life. So the appeals court basically created a conveyor belt that takes Trump from the presidency straight to prison. From the White House to a federal cell. From the leader of the free world to an inmate. That's the path this ruling creates. And it's the path Trump is now on. There's no way off, no exit, just the slow, inevitable progression toward the moment when his presidency ends and the legal system comes for him. So where does this leave us? The D.C. Circuit has issued a ruling that destroys Trump's main legal defenses. Self-pardon doesn't work. Immunity is too narrow to protect most charges. There's no immunity for impeachable crimes. Prosecutions will proceed after the presidency. Trump has no escape routes left. And when his presidency eventually ends, he faces trial on multiple serious felony charges. Charges that carry decade-plus sentences. Charges where the evidence is strong and convictions are likely. And convictions at Trump's age mean life in prison, mean dying in federal custody. That's not speculation. That's not partisan wishful thinking. That's just the logical outcome of the legal situation this ruling creates. Trump faces serious charges. He has no defenses. Trials will happen. Convictions are probable. And sentences will be long enough that Trump dies in prison, given his age. That's the conveyor belt. That's the path this ruling creates. From presidency to prison with no stops, no exits, just the inevitability of Trump spending his final years behind bars. And there's nothing he can do about it except try to stay president forever, which he can't. So life in prison isn't just possible. Given this ruling and the charges and the evidence and Trump's age, it's the most likely outcome. It's what happens if the system works the way the court says it should. And that's why this ruling matters. Because it makes Trump's imprisonment not just possible, but probable. Not just a threat, but an expectation. Not just one scenario among many, but the default outcome if the legal process proceeds as the court says it should. That's the reality Trump is facing. That's the future this ruling creates.